Hello, thank you for joining this second video panel discussion on the topic of transmission. Transmission is a key factor in the Trillium Awakening Dharma, but what is transmission? Today, I'm delighted to be joined by three colleagues in the Trillium Awakening Teacher Circle who will share their perspectives on transmission. What is it? What role did it play in their own awakening process? And what role does it play in their teaching practice? As I introduce each of today's speakers, we'll take a moment for you to gaze with them before I move on to the other panelists. I'm honored to welcome to our panel today, teacher and member of the Trillium Awakening Elders Circle, Van Nguyen. Van has the distinction of being one of the longest practicing teachers in our work. Van is the son of Vietnamese immigrants and spent 39 years working as a holistic dentist in San Francisco. He retired from dentistry earlier this year and currently lives near Sedona, Arizona with his partner, Lynn. Van has been a longtime teacher for over 22 years, starting in 1996 as one of the earliest of the first wave of teachers trained by Samuel Bonder, founder of Waking Down in Mutuality, the ancestor organization out of which Trillium Awakening emerged. As an honored elder teacher, he is a member of the Elders Council of the Trillium Awakening Teacher Circle. As a teacher, Van both honors the spiritual traditions and is moved to creatively innovate and synthesize new evolutionary expressions of what came before. In the early days of Waking Down, he was the unofficial Dharma guardian, along with being known as one of the ongoing progressive supporters of the organic, spontaneous revelation of being. Spiritual transmission has always played a vital and important role in Van's realization process. When Van first went to sit with Samuel in June of 1995 in a ripe state of receptivity, Samuel's potent transmission helped catalyze the initiation of the embodied feeling witness consciousness. Through continued study and transmission, the second birth, or what we now call whole being realization in Trillium Awakening, rapidly unfolded about 7 weeks later. In the summer of 2000, Van had a further deepening of his realization through the nectarous spiritual transmission of the heart-awakened teacher David Sparrow, who was a master in the Divine Mother lineage. Van was immersed in the transmission of the Mother consciousness, whereby he experienced an ecstatic, radiant love bliss intoxication. The additional aspects of the energetic Shakti current and the devotional love bliss effulgence of divine being were combined with the already established seamless awakening ground of embodied consciousness. Over years of continued exposure to David's transmission, Van noticed a catalytic acceleration of the deepening of his whole being realization into a more advanced stages, where the inherent divine unity between the absolute and the relative, the transcendental and the material, the divine and human, further intensified. The divinization of the body-mind and the material world unfolded into greater fullness within the all-inclusive unity. In this deepening process full of transmission and grace, Van rediscovered that in addition to having a keen discriminative capacity of insight and understanding, he was also an ecstatic devotional mystic who was oriented toward the feminine face of supreme divine being. He is a lover of love, bliss, inebriation, and Mother Shakti, who feels that radiant supreme love is the heart of existence, with transcendental consciousness being the fundamental ground, the body of existence. As a teacher, Van wishes to bring more of these expanded elements into Trillium Awakening to enrich our lives both before and after awakening. Van, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you, Subhaga. So we'll start out with some gazing. All right, so I have about 5 minutes for talking about what is transmission. First, I'd like to say I'm a little nervous, and this is, for those who don't know, this is a little strange because we're staring at a camera and talking into a camera. So this is something new for me. So I wanted to skip to the punchline about what is transmission. Actually, it is hard to describe transmission. It's like trying to describe love. It really can't be put into words. But the punchline is that transmission works. Transmission is the spiritual juice for the whole being realization process. So you actually do not have to understand how it works. It works. And it takes two. So there's the transmitter, in this case, if I'm at a sitting, it's I'm the teacher realizer who's transmitting to the student, the receiver. And it takes two because the receiver needs to be in a receptive ripeness. We have a fancy name in Trillium Awakening called the rot. I like the term spiritual ripeness. So there's a receptivity and a deep interest, a heart yearning for transmission, for awakening, for realization, and that evokes or draws forth, intensifies the spiritual transmission from the teacher. If a person is not hungry, it don't happen too much, or you may not feel it. And I think it's also easier to think of transmission as more as a resonant field, an amplified resonant field, rather than as an energy beam from one person to another. It's even like an atmosphere that happens in the room, like when you do a sitting. And so begin with that. Then I wrote something fancy, so I'm going to just read this one quote from my iPhone here. Transmission is being to being communion in the one being, capital B, the one divine self, the wholeness of total being that we already are. So that's the secret of why transmission works, why spiritual realization works. In a way, it's not a realization. We're not going to some state. We're not going elsewhere. We already are that which we're wanting to realize. There is this inherent wholeness of total being. There is only whole being, or the divine self. We already are that. Now, simultaneously, the secret, the paradox at the heart of existence is that divine being or divine self is simultaneously unmanifested and manifested. It's simultaneously absolute and relative. So we feel separate as this little separate self. And the thing is, we're both this individuated, local, separate self, and we're also the divine unity, and the divine self, the transcendental. And they're actually married together, and that's what's discovered in whole being realization. We already are that. And in transmission, I'm resting and abiding in that, what we already are, both of us, and amplifying, intensifying, magnifying. So then the student's process gets activated and initiated, and it's like a catalyst that accelerates the awakening process. So that would be one way of trying to describe that which is undescribable in words. So thank you.
Thank you, Van. Let's see, I'm going to switch our camera view again. All right. Joining us from Twisp, Washington this morning is Sugandhi Catherine Barnes. Sugandhi became an interning teacher in 2017. She is an artist and painter, which helps her discover hidden parts of herself that arise in the creative process. The Trillium path has transformed and continues to transform her life. It has given her a context and language within which she is becoming all her authentic self, deeply embodied, while continually resting in being consciousness. From her teacher page, Sugandhi shares about the evolution of her awakening. As a child, she experienced spontaneous shifts from everyday reality into the realms of infinite consciousness. These experiences raised questions that resulted in a lifetime of seeking for the truth about God and who or what I am. When I discovered Waking Down in Mutuality, I had already done years of work on myself through therapy and other modalities. At the time, I was practicing yoga and meditation and following an Eastern-based spiritual path. After attending my first sitting, I was particularly skeptical and resistant to learning yet another system for awakening. That evening, I felt the teacher's transmission profoundly, but I couldn't see the benefit of sharing. How ironic that mutuality would prove to be a key to my awakening. Over time, I came to realize how vitally important it is for me to be seen, heard, and held without judgment while speaking my truth. I went to as many sittings, workshops, and retreats as I could and soaked up a lot of transmission on the way to my second birth on December 11th in 2011. For Sugandhi, awakening is a process that we all experience uniquely, moving at our own pace and coming to it from different angles. Her own awakening was initially transcendent and impersonal, a space of luscious emptiness and experienced onlyness, herself as everything. This was followed some months later by a second awakening when she fell dramatically into her heart. Since then, she is relaxing more and more into her body as her awakening continues to deepen, as various patterns and pieces arise to be seen and felt and integrated into the whole. She says, "I have finally come home to myself after a lifetime of being away. I feel my purpose is to be fully present here and experience everything, all the juiciness and lusciousness as well as, and maybe especially, the heartache, to courageously and authentically live from the core paradox, being grounded in the well-being of infinite consciousness, while at the same time being rooted in humanity, allowing all of myself with love and compassion for the difficulty of being here in this limited, poignant, vitally alive, embodied life." Sugandhi lives about 5 miles from a town of 1,000 people in a valley in central Washington, surrounded by mountains, inspired by the vast, ever-changing sky, and deeply nourished by the presence of silence. Sugandhi, welcome. So take a few minutes. Thank you, my dear one. So take a few minutes and give us your elevator speech to answer the question, what is transmission?
What is transmission? Oh, it's kind of funny because I'm also nervous, and I'm so moved by my own writing. Like when somebody else says it, combined with the transmission that I'm feeling, I'm falling just deeply into this beautiful, vulnerable place. Transmission, it is one of those things that is almost impossible to describe. I just want to mention that we skipped the gazing part for me, right? But anyway, forget it.
We'll just gaze at the end of your elevator speech.
Okay. Transmission. I think what we're talking about here when we talk about transmission is awakened transmission, which, Van pointed out as well. But it's what I perceive is the life force, the being force, the divine, sacred force of God really flows through the awakening being, and the recipient, can either experience that or not, as you say, depending on how many sort of barriers there are to that. I also feel that transmission is almost something that it's not that it doesn't happen, not in mutuality, but in mutuality with another person. It's almost for the other. You know, it's not necessarily for me. It's for the person that I'm gazing with. It's for the whole room. I believe that transmission is this energetic force that actually holds the sacred container that we talk about in our sittings. To me, it feels like love. It feels like love, relaxation, bliss, sweetness. It can be intoxicating. You know, I find that the more I'm in this work, and there are times when I'm in a transmission field that just feels so strong to me that I just become like the drunken idiot or something, stumbling around, beaming, you know. So it is enlivening. It makes us feel more alive, more beaming, full of light. And it's transformative, as you mentioned. It is transformative, and I do believe it's a large factor. We don't know how big of a factor it is in our work, but I'll talk more about that later.
Great. So why don't you share a minute of gazing with us?
Thank you.
Our third panelist joining us today is interning teacher Kelly Yee. Kelly Yee entered the work in 1999 and had his second birth shortly thereafter. Based on his interning teacher page bio, I've gleaned some of what led him to both our work and his rapid confirmation as a whole being realizer. He had a long spiritual practice encompassing Christianity and Eastern meditation and yoga teachings. Kelly writes, "Through the practice of Surat Shabd Yoga, I had many experiences and synchronicities that were not typical, such as various encounters with the unseen world. Through these experiences, I realized that reality was much bigger than the materialist worldview that was predominant when I went to college. Eventually, while practicing in this tradition, I had a sudden realization of what is termed consciousness in Trillium Awakening. I realized that I was not my body and not my mind, but an ever-present, timeless awareness beyond them. I termed this awareness God at the time and knew deep in my bones that everyone and everything is that." Kelly became an interning teacher in 2015. He felt drawn to being a teacher after being a mentor for approximately 12 years or so, and enjoys facilitating people's psycho-spiritual process, which led him down this path. He is also a psychologist and a professor of clinical and transpersonal psychology. In terms of his work as a Trillium teacher, in essence, his view is that there is not a separate thing anywhere in the universe and cosmos. We all inter-are. The process of awakening is being able to embrace this spiritual truth more and more fully, not just with the mind, but also with your heart, body, and whole being. And through this whole being realization, unfold your own unique expression of totality as you feel called. This includes all the wounded parts of yourself, as well as your highest and most mysterious divinity, from soul to spirit and even beyond. Kelly lives and practices in Palo Alto. So Kelly, why don't you share some gazing with us first
All right.
for about a
That's
minute?
good.
Thank you.
All right. Is the camera on me right now? Okay, great. It's kind of weird to gaze with a camera. That's the first time I've done that.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So tell us your elevator speech. What is transmission?
Sure, yeah. So for myself, I see transmission, personally, I don't see it as a special thing. I see transmission as a universal thing that everyone's doing all the time. I feel like as humans, even other sentient beings are transmitting certain states and traits of consciousness. What I think is unique in our work is that teachers in this work are transmitting certain qualities of awakening and the divine. And when that happens, there can be a sort of resonance that happens with practitioners, other teachers, other collections of individuals. And that actually creates a sort of almost like a transmission field during sittings, during retreats, or what have you. And within that field, I feel like kind of like what Van and both Van and Sugandhi were saying, it's almost like something else that's very much like transpersonal gets constellated in that field. And it feels almost like we're all participating in something much bigger than ourselves, which I think is the phenomenological experience of some of this attuning to these states and traits. Within our work, I think there's certain qualities that each teacher embodies more. I'd say for Van, for example, he's really developed and progressed in this transmission of the divine love quality of the divine being. And also through his work with David and other teachers, and probably his own unique spiritual development and soul has really magnified that quality. So he naturally has that sort of transmission, and then during the gazing meditations and other times, I feel like it gets magnified. Yeah, so in general, that's my general sense, and I think each person, each teacher, each person, each even sentient being in the universe has their own unique transmission, and each person, through their own personal development, really develop a certain type of transmission that the more that they develop, they start radiating certain particular qualities of the divine. So I see that as our work helping individuals go through their development to start radiating more of those divine qualities. I think that's about it for now. for the
Okay,
elevators.
great. Thank you, Kelly. All right, so we will now enter into our formal part of the conversation where I'll ask each teacher 2 questions. We'll go through first one round and then a second round. So Van, we're going to start with you. What role did transmission play in your awakening process?
First, I want to share that it was very exciting and enjoyable to hear Sugandhi and Kelly share their perspective on transmission. And I'm going to give a commercial now. This is one of the assets of Trillium Awakening, multiple teachers, multiple awakened teachers, different flavors, qualities, different soul nature. And so then here's an example of it. It's just wonderful. It's just thrilling to me. Okay, so how long do we have for this part approximately?
I'd say about 15 minutes.
Okay. All right. Transmission has been a key component, primary ingredient of my spiritual process. Excuse me, I'm gonna get a little water. From before the old name, the second birth, then to have the initial realization, and then further deepening, further evolution, or further maturing of the whole being realization continues to play a big role. So I'll give some more specifics. I'm going to give just a little overview. I have found myself, even after the initial second birth, I recognized that my sense was there's further evolution that could happen. And then we talked some about that in Trillium Awakening, but one of my goals as a teacher and a member of the Elders Council is to expand the current Dharma, and also to expand the umbrella to encompass the diversity of perspectives that we have in the whole range of Trillium teachers. So when I first talk about the initial second birth, I would call that initial whole being awakening. The thing that I was going to say is that I was interested in continuing to deepen in the awakening after the initial second birth. So I further, let's say, did graduate studies. I did graduate studies. And transmission was the key of the graduate studies, like accelerating, further evolving into, let's say, maturing into more advanced stages of whole being realization. And so I discovered that this does happen, to skip forward, like the initial paradoxical unity of being of the divine and the human, the sandwich of the absolute and the relative, this being finite and infinite, this unity further gets fuller and fuller. You can say, well, unity is unity, but it gets fuller and fuller. And the personal self gets further divinized and more fused or dissolved into this unified field, the supreme unified field of whole divine being. And so transmission has played a role in accelerating and catalyzing this further fullness of unity. And then also these qualities that I was very thrilled that Gandhi was talking about, the drunkenness and the bliss and the love. That actually, and thank you, Kelly, you recognize I'm a love bug. Like, love is, I feel, the heart of existence, divine love, supreme love, the core of existence. And so this is an inherent part of my being, my soul nature. And I found, let's say, further magnification, intensification of divine love and bliss and the intoxication, and then the aliveness of the Shakti through transmission. Okay, so that's the overview. Now go to the second birth. So I go to see Samuel Bonder, and I felt like I was a spiritual failure and a human failure. And I had a traumatic childhood and abuse, and I did 8 years of one-to-one therapy. And I'm the living proof that you can be neurotic and have wounding and stuff like that and still awaken. But you awaken with it. You don't like get all of a sudden a new, oh, I'm all different. And that's the challenge of being these extremes of the human and the divine. And they're fused together, and in the simultaneous sandwich, that you have more stable access to living in and as that paradox of being human and divine. And you get more divine and you get more human, you become more and more also yourself as you relax into that. But you awaken with your neurotic stuff. And so I went to see Samuel like that. I did not even think I could awaken in this lifetime. I thought I was going to get like grace so that I could awaken in a future lifetime. So I went to see Samuel to try to get some grace and help. And so I sat there in his living room, and during the gazing, and in this time he was gazing randomly, and he happened to gaze with me twice. And then there's the closed eye part, and it's hard to describe in words, but I felt like some kind of descent of some kind of energy. And I knew consciousness, you can't experience consciousness, but I was feeling some heightened presence. Something was happening. And the Reader's Digest version, in that sitting, the embodied feeling witness consciousness came awake. And I was sitting there going, okay, I'm witnessing this. Let's see, this shouldn't be happening to me. Oh, that thought is arising in this awareness field in consciousness. And I was going, wow, this is interesting. This could be happening to me. Oh, this shouldn't be happening. Oh, that is arising. So that was remarkable to me. That's transmission, the power of magic of transmission, the accelerator, the spiritual juice. So I continued to work with Samuel. And there were 2 other colleagues of his that held sittings separately that I also went to see and get juiced up, tanking up on being, this being force. So it was, I think, somewhere, what did I say, 11 weeks or whenever it was, August 11th, the second birth happened. So I felt this intensification of consciousness, the fire and burning of consciousness, and also felt this love, this uncaused, centerless love. And so that was magic. This transmission had this accelerator effect, this catalytic effect. Let's see. So what I found out is I was ripe. Okay, so because I thought I can't awaken, but there was this ripeness there. The rot had happened. I went with the rot. Okay, so that was remarkable. Reader's Digest version. Then there was a certain, I noticed, let's say after 5 years, so this is 2000. It was I call it the beige period, where I was recognizing I was consciousness in the body, and there was this wellness from that, and my neurotic issues would come up, but I could not be exclusively identified with them, and there was a sense of unity of the material and the divine dimensions, so more seamlessness, this paradoxical seamless unity. But I wasn't really happy, and I was kind of lonely and just working in dentistry and da-da-da. So I had heard about David Sparrow, and so I went to see him. And in the sitting, he said, "Don't just listen to me," because I was trying to figure out his realization. Figure out. Then he said, "Don't just listen to me, feel me." So I opened in feeling, and then in a short period of time, I was feeling this like ecstasy, this love, bliss, intoxication, like a love swoon, and like I was drunk, and I couldn't believe this was happening with that intensity and so fast. So that was remarkable. So that again is transmission. Let's say it's probably another variety of transmission. I call this the mother transmission, where you have that love, bliss, the Shakti current, and this inebriation, along as the ground of consciousness. This is all part of it, and an embodied, unified field of all that. And afterwards, then after this sitting for weeks, and it continued, I felt like I was in love, and I was happier, and like the life, like it was a black and white scene of the surroundings becoming color. I was going, "It's a pity to die," and I was going, "Wow, this is amazing! What to find this aspect that's available." And so my personal aesthetic is I'm oriented to the feminine face of God, or the supreme divine self, and that to me is the supreme love and the living energy current and the bliss and the nectar. So I'm a nectar addict. Yeah. So that's why I've continued to spend time with David Sparrow. I just happen to have this, soul connection with, so to get irradiated by this, to deepen in this, and so this unity and more waves of love, bliss, enjoyment. It is intoxicating. It is like getting drunk, and this is one of the things I want to expand in Trillium Awakening, because we have focused on the consciousness and the changing phenomena, and put kind of to the side the living current, the Shakti current, the divine energy, and then also the divine love and bliss, and that side. So I want to bring this into Trillium Awakening more, because this is the whole spectrum of being, and we want to, it's whole being realization. So this is part of the whole spectrum of being, and there's this wholeness and totality, but is also this, love permeated unity, this unified field. So so transmission, I continue. I'm an addict. I'm a bliss addict. Okay, so I continue to go spend time with David to magnify and intensify this, and then, then you get irradiated by it. The body mind gets irradiated by it. So also, being a teacher, I want to share this with others, and so I feel I'm getting further irradiated enough to share this and transmit this. This is all grace. Like, remember, I didn't even think I could awaken. I wasn't planning to become a teacher, and so this is all grace and very magical that this has unfolded in my life. Now, also I have to say, I'm a little shy about teaching, and I have the neurotic personality is this perfectionist side where I keep going. I don't know if any of you out there suffer from this, but it's like, I'm not good enough. I got to grow further, not perfect enough. So this is so also that this is part of what I embrace, the human and the divine, and this whole fullness of being. Just one further thing to say is transmission. More recently, there was a further deepening where the through the transmission, it was being of David, and the unity got fuller and fuller and became like a singular. The singularity of the unity and the undividedness of divine being became more obvious. And the personal self, which I was just relaxing, embracing the personal self moment to moment, and then relaxing it second to second, letting it be. Then the unity of being, the wholeness of being, the totality of being became more obvious. Like there's only one supreme divine being. Everything is that. And the personal self got more dissolved into that. The unity became more prominent than the personal self. And then I'm going, wow, we're all that. See, this is the secret. We all are the divine, the full divine being. There is no separateness from it that we have to get reconnected to. It's already a total unity, seamless unity. So this further got intensified, a greater fullness, like a primordial oneness. So this is all part of transmission and the magic and grace of transmission. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Van. That was just such a rich and beautiful discussion of transmission. And I really loved and appreciated how you talked about, not feeling as if you could even awaken in this lifetime, and really the unzipping, think we're going to unzip and this new thing is going to pop out. So really quite beautiful. Okay, Sugandhi, tell us about your the role of transmission in your awakening process.
Wow. Van has a way of making me feel drunk, but I'm going to focus here on myself. Okay, transmission has been a huge part of my awakening process. I mentioned in Subhaga mentioned to me in my introduction that I had experiences as a child of, I called it dropping into consciousness there, but of course, you don't really experience consciousness. So I realized that, yes, I did, but probably what I experienced was the coming back. I would disappear and come back, and I would feel this just tremendous peace. And very notable experiences, I remember them very specifically and very strongly. And I'm not going to go throughout my whole life, but, I think the first time I really felt I was immersed in transmission was with Amma. For about 5 years before I stumbled onto Waking Down, I became an Amma devotee, and I would go to her whenever she was in the country and go to all the different places, travel, and I went to her ashram in India one time. And what I experienced with her was so profound. I really felt her energy would just enter my body, and I was aware of it. It was almost like she was moving the furniture around in my inside. It would rearrange and transfigure me inside, and it felt like I was being aligned, more and more aligned to the divine quality of her transmission. And it was addictive, it was kind of not addictive, but blissful. just the love just pouring off of this individual. It's not, just pouring, just channeling the love and bliss energy of life, divine, sacred energy, which of course is intensified by being close, having the embrace. But I could feel that transmission before I even walked in the room, in the parking lot. You're like, here I am, So I had that experience, but I knew, intuitively, I needed something more. This was not my path, simply. I needed something more. So we were looking around and found a Waking Down sitting 5 minutes, 10 minutes from where I live, and we went, and it was sitting with Alan Morlock, who later became my teacher, and I remember sitting there, the whole process of sharing and all that, I was just like, ugh, so it feels like a therapy group, I wasn't into it. But I felt his transmission. I felt this energetically, I felt deeply, deeply peaceful. I was in a sweet, sweet place. The mind is not liking what's going on, but the body was just open to the energetic of the sitting. And so much so that I remember I had trouble even driving the car home. We drove a little bit to the first stop sign, and I just remember stopping there and it's like, oh my God, I don't even remember which way to turn or how to change, like what's going on here. It's very intriguing, and is what brought me into the work. I learned about transmission early. I heard that spoken, transmission is a large part of the work, and this sort of description of this energetic quality. I thought, oh yeah, okay. So I did all the things. I read every book. I gazed with pictures, and I gazed with gazing videos on the internet, and I went to as many in-person weekends and sittings as I could over the next, it took me 9 months. I was just like a baby. I had 9 months, and then I had my initial awakening, which we call whatever we call it now, whole being realization. And that was during the third Rose of Your Heart weekend with Saniel. Alan was also there, and many of my beloved friends were there. And during that, I don't know if I'm skipping too much, but that's okay. During that weekend, I really felt suspended, sort of between this incredible opening to the field in a way of, I would say, a non-ordinary state, you could call it. I was just kind of suspended between being, you know what I think I was? I think I had the embodied witness consciousness. This is so interesting because when you mentioned that, Van, I really thought, oh, that's probably what happened to me, because during the weekend, I kept, my mind would go like, but you still feel separateness. I was feeling this opening. It was like I was having, all the colors were brighter, all the people were shining with divine light. Early on in my experience with sittings, love had come on board, and I had felt like I loved everybody in the room within half an hour of being in a sitting. And, this quality just was, 10 times more. I was just like, but I at the same time, there's this little voice saying that, yeah, but you still feel separateness. And then something would happen that would show me that wasn't true. And then the next question I'd have was, yeah, but, I went through this interrogation process of myself the whole weekend. And then by the time I went home, I just had an opening of emptiness in my body that was actually visible to me. I could look inside, and it would be almost like totally like an empty space. Like I felt like the wind could blow through me. I was completely open, and that lasted for a couple months. And then again, I was in an intense transmission field at a weekend with Jean Marchand. It was beautiful, he's a very heart-centered person. In fact, the question of the weekend is, what is your heart's desire? And, we really delved into this. And in the middle of that weekend, I just dropped completely into that open space, just filled in, and this amazing sort of effervescent, effulgent feeling happened in my chest, and I was completely stunned with the beauty and the poignance of everything, and just the divine nature of everything. I could really feel that. I fell deeply into what else was I going to talk about? Further evolution. Well, I had been in human design, and I think part of this was I already had spent 7 years switching my orientation from my mind to my body. So I kind of skipped that part, but that's I think really important in my experience. I was already sort of energetically attuned to my body, but then that became more my leader, my decision maker. And this is where I feel guided. And I do feel guided. I feel that I'm more and more, as I awaken more and more, I'm, I didn't want to become a teacher either. And it happened because I felt my body just kept going that way. It's just, and the mind is complaining, and, I don't like to do this kind of thing. I really don't like to talk this much. It's like, I just want to be in my studio and paint my pictures and listen to nothing, the silence and the weight and the beauty of the mountains. I don't want to do all this hard stuff. But I'm compelled, and this is my way. I'll just say maybe one more thing. I recently went to an evolutionary collective introductory weekend, because I too feel like what happens for me is every time I was taught at the TR this summer, and I felt there something came on board, which was felt like the power of the transmission I felt coming through me felt like it was tripled or something. I just felt this really big change, and it was interesting, and I just leaned into it. It would be a little bit more, and leaned into it. I'd feel it a little bit more, and it felt like I was sort of shining forward. So I was looking for more places where I could just go and be in that field. So I thought, I'll try this. It's about, and it's interesting because I feel that mutuality has been a big key for me. I needed to be able to put out in words what was going on with me, and if it would lock it in, and I would understand it better, and I would be, sort of fleshing out my awakening. And this is what they're all about. So it's almost like, I don't know, it's really, really profound to drop into that kind of transmission field where it's all about just unity with the other. There's no telling your story. It's a little different than what we do, but it's just almost like the next step in mutuality, where you're simply being with the other person in deeper and deeper ways. It was quite beautiful. So yes, we are here as teachers to help people. Do we help people? We transmit this energy. Transmission is doing the work. This is one message I do want to get across. I feel like I went zipped through in 9 months to my awakening, and I think that happened because I really focused on placing myself in transmission, in awakened transmission, through reading, through gazing, through in-person contact. I mean, online contact is good if that's all you have, but still buy the plane ticket, go to the in-person things as well, because that's really where it happens. And it is magical, beautiful. Yeah, part of our work. I think that's pretty good.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Makes me think, maybe we should have a nice panel discussion on mutuality as well, because you're talking about how when we come into mutuality, with another, how the transmission is really amplified. And what you said about, when we have to speak, what's going on with us, how it kind of locks it down, locks it in for us so we can understand it and know it in a different way, really bringing the mind and the body together. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sugandhi. Okay, Kelly, tell us about the role of transmission in your awakening process.
Sure, sounds good. So for myself, it was pretty central, the transmission. My very first Waking Down weekend was when I had I'd say my initial shift from this whole being realization state, I'd say. And how that happened was mainly through the transmission. I was gazing with a couple of teachers that are no longer with Trillium or Waking Down. One guy, I think his name was John. I was gazing with him, and then this place, consciousness for me was more spatial, and it felt like this timeless, changeless space behind my mind. So I came into the work, I pretty much was living that way for a couple of years, and then during the gazing, it just fell forward into my body and then into the world. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's this, the word I used was, there's this translucency that it's like pervading the world and manifestation in some way. Right before that, though, actually, I was gazing with this woman who also was in the work before. Her name is Rini, and she had a very potent and strong transmission, actually. And right before I gazed with John, with Rini, I felt also that kind of shift from being behind myself, shift into the body. But actually, it felt like something in my belly broke open. And I felt like a little teary-eyed. And I think through her transmission, and she had a very strong, heart energy and kind of divine love energy. And what broke open, it felt like some sort of almost like wounding I was holding in my body broke open with her. And then that's when that happened with John. So I think that combination actually catalyzed my whole being realization. And then from that point, similar to what Sugandhi and Van were talking about, I got not addicted, but I was going to a lot of sittings. I was going to sittings maybe 3 to 4 times a week. This is when in Marin there's quite a number of sittings with Samuel, with his ex-partner, with Linda. All sorts of people were giving sittings. I used to sit with Van and Jen a lot as well. And through that process, I would see whenever I would go to sittings that it really would magnify this. It's like a silent, love, bliss, open consciousness state. Whenever I would go to the sittings, it would just really magnify that. But I did notice a sort of struggle for myself during that time. So I was doing that probably my first year or so involved with the work. But I noticed when I would leave the sittings and then there would be some carryover into my life, I noticed some of the same sort of self-contractions come back. And that was this kind of like oscillating type of phenomena we talk about in the work.